Hey.
Hey. How do I pronounce your name? Is it Leanne?
It's Lin.
Lean. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay.
Are you a shadow? Are you shadowing?
Yeah, I'm one of the shadows.
Remote shadow.
Yeah, sadly, I was in San Francisco, but had to return. And luckily I did, because, yeah, it shut down anyway.
Yeah, thanks. Glad you made it back safe.
Yeah, I think it was just in time. And luckily I was going out of the US, because looking into the US, looking on Twitter, the lines of people having to wait, I don't think it was pleasant if you have to wait hours and hours in line.
Yeah, exactly.
I had the opposite. There was nobody anywhere.
Yeah. Hey, Sid.
Hey, Kenny. How are you?
All right. How are you? How are you coping? You locked up in your apartment?
Hold up. So that's fine. I was a bit distracted this morning. I tried to get a website live shelter in place because I thought, like, if it's going exponential, some of the states should be shutting down, just like we are in San Francisco. But
yeah,
just looked at the latest data from Washington, and it seems it's linear, so not exponential. So it seems that the distancing is working good enough that I'm not sure I want to stand on a barricade and shout about something.
Yeah. I will say Kansas actually proactively canceled all schools through the end of the year, which is not something a bunch of other states have done, but in like an abundance of caution. And I imagine we'll get to shut down shortly, even though we haven't seen that kind of rate of transmission here.
Yep. No, Kansas is way ahead of the curve. Well done.
Yeah. Cool. So I think we're already recording. I guess I'll give the overview. I did this post-hog walkthrough, and I think it highlighted, to me, a really cool gap in our single application between, like we say monitor, and monitor is typically very focused on your application performance and availability, but post-hog is kind of like the feedback loop for your product instrumentation, something we struggle with at GitLab in terms of having a separate tool that instruments our application from where we create and develop our application. So I thought it was really interesting. You pointed out that, hey, it's more common for people to use Snowplow. I know that we use Snowplow, and Snowplow I see as like kind of a disaggregated pipeline that you can plug and play into and doesn't have a lot of UI capabilities, and so needs a UI for integration.
Yeah, it's only the kind of let's call it client side, if that's okay with you. It's the client side and not the UI side.
Yeah, and so when you pointed that out, totally makes sense to me. It would be a place where we could immediately dog food. I had made this point about, I think there's a little bit of conflict, and you'd responded, hey, I don't know where there is conflict, and let me voice over where I've seen this conflict. And I was actually the person who wrote the like product principle in here because I spotted this before. But one of the things that seems to be happening as we're building more and more completeness to our DevOps tool, there's lots of times where we're confronted with the question of, should we build this for the user who's already found a solution for this integrated problem and add it in, or for the user who has no exposure to this and is kind of starting fresh? And I have proposed that we start with the person who's starting fresh, because in lots of these cases, especially in the ops section,
no one will switch from a product that's 10 times better. So like that makes total sense.
Yeah, and the example that I give is Kubernetes management, right? Like our Kubernetes management and integration is relatively simple compared to someone who's been doing Kubernetes for 3 years, but for the fact that we know the majority of the market is still yet to adopt Kubernetes, it's very useful in that context. And so that was what I think I'm applying that same logic in the post-hog example. Post-hog would be like easy to install, one-click install, get you started with product instrumentation. Seems like more valuable than, well, I would propose would be more valuable than if you've already set up Snowplow and have all this infrastructure, then we can visualize it for you. And I'm not suggesting it has to be an either or, but that's the tension that I was describing.
Okay, I mean, first of all, when you appeal to a principle, it's really important to call the principle out. For example, if we hire someone and make a hiring decision, say that isn't aligned with our values, that's useless. That is like, what do you mean? We have 6 values. Like, which one of the values? So when I read your comment, I was like, what are you talking about? One of our
Okay.
product principles is that we have a single application. And you're proposing to have a separate application. You're telling me that my thing doesn't comply with the product principles. Like, obviously, that's not how you intended it and everything else, but it's just helpful to call out which product principle you're talking about.
Cool.
Second thing, there's kind of an assumption that the client-side part of Snowplow is harder to use than the client-side part of PostHog.
Yeah, I would agree
I'm
with
not
that.
so sure. I'm not so sure about that.
Okay.
I think Snowplow is probably a lot more battle tested, and it's probably easy to get started with just because it's more popular.
Okay. I'm not super familiar with how you set up, and maybe that would help if I did a walkthrough of like how to set up Snowplow, because it appeared that I had to go install many different sections of the pipeline in and procure my own infrastructure for doing so. And those were the steps that seemed barriers.
So I think make sure what part we're talking about. So Snowplow, JavaScript, let's call it the JavaScript part. Super easy, hopefully. Snowplow backend, like Kafka, receiving, everything else, super heavy duty, and you have to do it all yourself. So basically that's not part of Snowplow, you just have to make your own. So, but what we're talking about is which client library to use. I'm missing up client and JavaScript, I'm using them interchangeably. But I think the client library, a Snowplow is not harder than from PostHog.
Yeah, that was apparent to me. It was more with PostHog, if I install it on a Kubernetes cluster, I get all of that backend. It's not robust for scalable, but it's at least the starting point.
You get the backend. What is the backend? It's receiving, storing, and displaying. I think our problem is we want a single application. So the displaying we can't do in PostHog anyway. It needs to be in GitLab because we want a single application. Yep. Then the storing, we could just do it in Postgres. Snowplow is from anything you can store in Postgres, and they all support it. So it's just that, do we use PostHog and are stuck with another interface, which is super bad, and now we got iframe that and everything else, and it's not that fancy of a display anyway, versus do we receive the events ourselves? It seems pretty trivial to me to receive the events at a low volume. At a high volume, it gets super complex with Kafka and everything else. PostHog is not super complex. PostHog doesn't solve that problem either, so we can quickly get to kind of parity there.
Yeah, and I think, in my mind, I can see it going either way in terms of prioritizing one or the other. And the dog fooding use case is eminently more valuable to me than the other principles. And we specifically highlight in our product principles that we will choose dog fooding initiatives, even if that means not doing, cloud native first or something like that, because we get much better feedback and can drive improvements quicker. So I can get behind that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. It's a balance between dog fooding and single application versus getting the first iteration out the door. And that's tough because iteration is a super valuable thing as well. But I think since we have the other two on that side, I think that tips the balance for me.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm still going to engage with the PostHog team, and if they're willing to community contribute the managed app, that's great. I don't think we would be, honestly, we're not planning, Dove's not here, but I doubt Dove would be prioritizing this type of work in the next coming releases. But that makes sense to me that if we're going to put our resources on it, it would be for the dog fooding principles and effort, but we can leave that accepting merge request on PostHog issue.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
I might have a stab at this weekend, but that's different.
Stab at what?
Put it in GitLab.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Cool. All right.
Cool. Thanks for the call.
Thanks, Ed. Yep. Take care.